She was an ordinary-looking woman, the type of person who could easily blend into a crowd without anyone noticing. Her clothes were always simple cotton dresses in light colors, comfortable shoes that had been used for years, and a small bag that carried only the things she needed. She never wore flashy jewelry, nor did she ever try to show off her possessions. At first glance, people often assumed she came from a modest background, someone who worked hard just to make ends meet. But the truth about her life was far more surprising, a truth very few people knew. Her name was Amina, and she had grown up in a small town with parents who had taught her strong values. From a young age, she learned the importance of humility and kindness. Even when she started achieving success later in life, those lessons never left her heart. While most people around her equated wealth with glittering accessories, expensive cars, and giant houses, Amina believed that wealth should never be worn on the outside. To her, wealth was like a secret power that gave her freedom, but it did not define her identity. Every morning, Amina would wake up early and follow a routine that brought her peace. She would make her own tea, water her small collection of plants, and sometimes walk to a nearby park just to breathe fresh air. Despite having the ability to hire people for every task, she chose to live simply. She preferred doing her own household chores, cooking her own meals, and keeping her surroundings minimal. For her, this simplicity was not a limitation but a choice that kept her grounded. Her neighbors never suspected the truth either. To them, she was just a quiet woman who didn't mingle much in parties or community gatherings. She would greet them politely, help whenever someone was in need, and always wear the same calm smile. Children liked her because she gave them sweets and told them kind words whenever they passed by her house. Adults respected her politeness, but they often wondered why she didn't seem interested in living a more glamorous life. The reality was that Amina owned several companies in different parts of the country. Years ago, she had made wise investments in land and businesses that grew far beyond what she had expected. Over time, her wealth multiplied many times, but she kept it away from the public eye. She did not like unnecessary attention, and she feared that money could attract fake friends or people who only cared about her wealth. So she made a decision: she would live simply, and only those closest to her would know who she really was. There was also another reason behind her simplicity. Amina believed that life's true happiness came from experiences, not possessions. She loved reading books, traveling to quiet places, and sitting by the seaside to watch the waves. She felt more joy eating simple homemade food than dining in an expensive restaurant surrounded by people trying to impress each other. This mindset made her different from many others, but it gave her a life full of peace. Whenever she went out, she dressed modestly. At the market, people treated her like any other customer, sometimes even offering her small discounts out of kindness. She never corrected their assumptions. She didn't tell them she could easily buy the entire shop if she wanted. Instead, she accepted their kindness with gratitude. She liked being treated as ordinary. It reminded her of her roots and helped her avoid the arrogance that often comes with wealth. But her simplicity often made others underestimate her. Some people assumed she was weak, while others thought she lacked ambition. They could not see the strength she carried within, the strength of someone who had worked hard, made smart choices, and achieved more than they could ever imagine. Amina never bothered to correct them. She had nothing to prove, and she believed that people's judgments revealed more about themselves than about her. There were times when she attended small community events. People noticed she never wore expensive dresses or drove luxury cars like others. Sometimes, whispers followed her as she walked into a room. "Why does she dress like that?" someone would murmur. "She must not be doing very well," another would say. Amina heard those whispers, but instead of feeling hurt, she smiled. She knew her truth, and she found it amusing how quickly people judged others by appearances. Her calm personality was also a big part of her life. While others ran after status and social validation, Amina found comfort in silence. She believed that rushing after material things often led to emptiness. Many times, she saw people showing off expensive clothes and gadgets, yet their eyes carried a certain sadness. She realized they were stuck in a cycle of trying to impress others, but she was free from that burden. At night, she often sat by her window with a warm cup of tea, looking at the city lights. From afar, she could see tall buildings, shiny cars, and busy roads filled with people chasing success. She respected their choices, but she knew that her own path was different. To her, real success meant living a life without stress, without the need to constantly compete or prove herself. And she had achieved that. Still, she never showed the world who she really was. Even at events where she had the chance to reveal her identity as the owner of large companies, she chose silence. She let others take the spotlight while she remained in the background. This often confused people, but Amina liked it that way. She believed that power was not about being loud, it was about being in control without anyone realizing it. However, her quiet life was about to take an unexpected turn. She didn't know it yet, but soon she would be invited to a gathering where the so-called elite of society would be present. There, her simplicity would not be admired, it would be mocked. And the same people who laughed at her plain clothes and humble lifestyle would soon face a shocking truth, one that would turn their pride into shame. But before that moment arrived, Amina continued her life as usual, walking through each day with grace, kindness, and humility. She had no idea how big a role her calmness would play when the storm of arrogance was about to test her strength. Amina's life moved quietly, but sometimes life brings situations that test even the calmest people. One such moment arrived when she received an unexpected phone call. It was from an old family friend who was hosting a big evening event in the city. This event was not just any gathering, it was where business leaders, social figures, and people from the so-called elite circle would meet. Her friend warmly insisted she should come. At first, Amina hesitated. She was not someone who enjoyed large crowds or glittering parties. But out of respect, she agreed. She thought, why not go for a little while? It will make my friend happy. So, she accepted the invitation. On the evening of the event, she got ready in her usual style. She picked a simple dress from her wardrobe, one she had worn before. It was clean, elegant, but not fancy. She tied her hair neatly and carried her old handbag, the same one she used every day. For shoes, she chose a comfortable pair that had been with her for years. She looked in the mirror and smiled. She did not care about trends or fashion. She believed a person's beauty came from their character, not their clothing. When she arrived at the venue, the first thing she noticed was the glitter of lights and the sound of laughter filling the hall. Expensive cars stood outside, their polished surfaces reflecting the glow of chandeliers inside. Men wore finely tailored suits, and women sparkled in gowns covered with jewels. Everyone seemed to be competing with each other, trying to look more important than the next person. As Amina walked in, she blended into the crowd in her quiet way. But it did not take long for people to notice her difference. Her simple dress and modest handbag did not match the glitter around her. At first, a few people looked at her curiously, then they turned to their friends and whispered. Soon, small circles of people began exchanging smiles and side glances in her direction. She remained calm, walking softly, smiling politely whenever someone's eyes met hers. She headed to a quiet corner, preferring not to interrupt anyone's conversations. But the whispers grew. Some guests were curious, while others were unkind. One woman, wearing a necklace that shone brighter than the lights in the hall, leaned towards her group and whispered, "Who is she? Look at her shoes. They must be years old." The others laughed softly, hiding their amusement behind their glasses of sparkling drinks. Another man, dressed in an expensive black suit, smirked and said, "Perhaps she came to the wrong place. This is not a charity event, after all." His friends chuckled, glancing at Amina as if she were a source of entertainment. Amina heard their words, though they thought she could not. Her heart remained steady. She had faced situations like this before. People had always judged her by her appearance, never realizing her true strength. Instead of reacting, she simply smiled and looked around the room, as though she was admiring the decorations. She soon noticed that the elite guests were engaged in endless conversations about money, cars, and luxury holidays. One man bragged about his new sports car, while another described his recent trip to Europe in detail. A group of women compared designer dresses, each trying to show off how expensive theirs was. It was clear to Amina that many of these people measured worth by the price of what they owned, not by the value of who they were. At one point, a small group approached her directly. A young woman, her face decorated with makeup that sparkled under the lights, asked with a half smile, "And who are you? I haven't seen you at any of these events before." Amina responded gently, "I'm just here to see an old friend." "It's nice to meet you." Her polite tone confused them. They expected her to explain her status or boast about her background, but she offered nothing more. The group exchanged glances, and one of them whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "She must not be anyone important." The laughter that followed was not cruel enough to be called an insult, but it was sharp enough to sting. Yet Amina stood gracefully, her smile unshaken. She knew something they didn't. She knew her silence was stronger than their arrogance. As the evening went on, the mocking grew bolder. Whenever she passed by, some would glance at her dress or bag and smirk. Others avoided her altogether, as if standing near her might lower their own status. But Amina never let her peace break. She listened, observed, and carried herself with dignity. There was one moment that stood out. A group of men were laughing loudly about their businesses, boasting about how much money they had made recently. One of them looked at Amina, then said jokingly, "What do you think, madam? Can you give us advice on how to buy the cheapest groceries? You must know better than anyone." His friends roared with laughter. Amina looked at them calmly and replied, "Sometimes the cheapest things are the most valuable. But not everyone can see that." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight the men did not understand. They laughed again, brushing off her comment, but a few people nearby grew quiet, sensing there was more behind her gentle words. Throughout the night, her friend, the host, was busy greeting guests and did not notice what was happening. Amina made sure not to trouble him. She knew her moment would come, and she had no need to defend herself now. Still, the difference in treatment was clear. While others were offered warm conversations and admiration, she was given mocking glances and cold smiles. In that glittering room, she was treated as an outsider, someone unworthy of respect. But what the elite did not realize was that their arrogance was being carefully noted by fate itself. A time was coming when the balance would shift. The very people who laughed at her would soon be left speechless, and their pride would crumble when the truth came into the light. For now, Amina chose silence. She believed patience was the strongest answer to ignorance. And while the snobby elite enjoyed their evening, laughing at her simplicity, they had no idea they were mocking a woman who was wealthier, stronger, and wiser than all of them combined. The night continued, filled with laughter, music, and glitter. Amina stayed until she felt it was polite to leave. She walked out the same way she had walked in, calm, graceful, and unbothered. The whispers followed her, but she carried them lightly, as if they meant nothing. Because to her, they truly meant nothing. She knew the truth, and soon, so would they. The next time Amina found herself among the same crowd, the atmosphere was even livelier than before. It was another social gathering, organized in a luxurious hall filled with golden lights, chandeliers, and tables decorated with flowers. The elite guests moved around with pride, speaking loudly about their businesses, their travels, and their possessions. For them, such events were more about showing off than truly connecting with others. Amina entered quietly, just as she always did. She wore another one of her plain dresses, one she had worn countless times before. Her small handbag hung lightly on her shoulder, and her shoes looked simple compared to the polished leather and glittering heels others wore. She walked with grace, her eyes calm, her lips carrying a gentle smile. She was not there to compete, nor was she there to impress anyone. But for the elite, her appearance became a source of amusement once again. This time, the whispers were louder, the laughter less hidden. Many people had noticed her at the previous event, and they had already formed their opinion: she was ordinary, someone out of place in such circles. One man leaned toward his companion and said loudly, "Look, she's here again with the same old bag. Perhaps she doesn't own another one." The others chuckled, nodding their heads. Another woman whispered, "I don't understand why she comes here. Doesn't she feel embarrassed dressing like that in front of everyone?" Her friend replied with a smirk, "Maybe she wants to see how real rich people live." Both laughed softly, glancing at Amina as if she were a character in a play made for their entertainment. Amina heard every word. She was not deaf to their whispers, nor blind to their mocking smiles. But she remained calm, choosing not to let their arrogance disturb her peace. She moved gracefully through the room, quietly listening, occasionally greeting those who acknowledged her with a nod or forced smile. Later that evening, when small groups gathered around tables, one group decided to draw her in directly. They had been speaking about luxury cars, each boasting about the speed, the comfort, and the price of their vehicles. When Amina walked past, one of them looked at her and said with a teasing tone, "Madam, tell us, what car do you drive? I'm sure it's something very modest." His friends laughed, waiting for her response. She looked at them softly and replied, "A car that takes me safely where I need to go. That is enough for me." Her words were simple, but the group found them amusing. One man smirked and said, "Well, of course, when one cannot afford the best, one learns to be satisfied with less." They all laughed again, as though they had won some invisible contest. Another guest joined in, adding, "Maybe she takes the bus. That would explain the handbag easy to carry around." His friends chuckled, enjoying the joke they had created at her expense. Amina stood there calmly, her smile unchanged. She did not argue, nor did she try to prove them wrong. She only said, "Comfort is not measured by the brand of a car or the shine of a handbag. Comfort comes from within." Her voice was gentle, but her words carried a truth none of them wanted to hear. So they dismissed it with more laughter, shaking their heads as if she were too naive to understand the real world. As the night went on, the mockery grew more direct. At one point, a group of women surrounded her near the refreshment table. One of them, holding a glass delicately, asked, "So tell us, where do you shop? Surely not in the same stores as the rest of us." The others giggled, waiting for her answer. Amina simply replied, "I shop wherever I find what I need. A simple cloth can be more valuable than the finest silk if it is worn with dignity." Her answer silenced them for a moment, but then one laughed and said, "How poetic. You must read too many books." The group erupted in giggles again, patting each other's shoulders as though they had made the cleverest joke of the night. In another corner, a man raised his voice deliberately so everyone could hear. "Can someone please explain why this lady is always invited? Who is she? She speaks like a teacher, dresses like a villager, and yet somehow she walks around as if she belongs here." Laughter filled the air once again. Amina's friend, the host, had not noticed these moments yet. He was busy entertaining and greeting his guests. But Amina herself did not mind. She had faced mockery before in different forms. She knew the world often judged by appearances. People rarely looked deeper, and most failed to recognize true value when it was right in front of them. Still, for those who watched closely, her grace in handling the situation was remarkable. While others would have argued, snapped back, or tried to defend themselves, she stood still, calm as water, letting their words pass over her like waves that could not move a rock. Her silence was stronger than their noise. But the elite mistook her silence for weakness. They thought she had no answer because she had no worth. And so, their arrogance only grew. At one point, a young man leaned against the wall and said loudly, "Mark my words, one day she will stop coming when she realizes she does not fit in here." His friends agreed, laughing and nodding. But little did they know, the story was about to change. They did not realize that the woman they mocked, the woman they thought of as less, was in truth greater than all of them combined. She carried a quiet strength, and behind her plain clothes lay a fortune beyond their imagination. That night ended like the first. Amina left the hall quietly, walking past the rows of luxury cars with her usual calmness. Some guests shook their heads, wondering why she kept coming when she was so out of place. Others laughed, remembering their jokes. None of them knew that their arrogance was setting the stage for their own humiliation. Because soon, in the very same circles where they laughed at her, the truth would shine. And when it did, their pride would collapse like glass breaking against stone. For now, Amina carried her peace home with her, untouched by their cruelty. She believed patience was her shield, and dignity her crown. She knew that life always reveals the truth at the right time. And that time was coming closer with every passing day. The evening that changed everything came sooner than anyone expected. Amina had once again been invited to a grand event, this time even larger and more glamorous than the gatherings before. The hall glittered with golden lights, the tables shone with crystal glasses, and soft music played in the background as the city's most important people gathered under one roof. Amina, as always, dressed simply. She wore a light-colored dress that carried no label, no designer name, just a plain but neat piece of clothing she felt comfortable in. Her small handbag hung at her side, and her shoes were the same pair she often wore. While others prepared for hours, choosing jewelry and spending fortunes on appearance, Amina had gotten ready in just a few minutes. She looked at herself in the mirror before leaving her home and smiled. "This is enough," she whispered softly. When she entered the hall, the reactions were almost predictable. Heads turned, whispers started, and mocking glances were exchanged. Some people smiled politely to her face but laughed behind her back, while others didn't bother hiding their amusement. "There she is again," a woman said to her group, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "Always dressed the same, as if she owns nothing else." Another replied, "It is strange, isn't it? Why does the host keep inviting her? She looks so ordinary." The laughter that followed was like a soft wave running across the room. Amina noticed, but her calmness did not leave her. She moved gracefully to a corner, sipping a glass of water and observing the evening quietly. The mockery grew as the night went on. When she walked past groups, people exchanged smirks. A few even questioned her directly again, trying to pull her into their circle of arrogance. She answered politely, without showing even a trace of irritation. But this night was not like the others. Tonight, the host, her old family friend, decided it was time to introduce her properly. He had watched silently before, respecting Amina's desire to stay in the background. But now he could no longer bear the arrogance he saw in the faces of his guests. As the music softened and the guests gathered around for a small speech, the host stood in the center of the hall. He was a respected man, someone whose voice carried weight in that circle. He raised his hand, and the room grew quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began warmly, "thank you all for coming tonight. It is always a pleasure to see such a fine gathering of people who contribute so much to our society. But before we continue, I would like to introduce someone very special." The crowd looked around curiously. Some smiled, expecting another wealthy businessman or a famous figure. The host continued, "Many of you have noticed my dear friend here, a woman who chooses to live in simplicity, and perhaps, some of you have made your own judgments about her. But allow me to share the truth with you tonight. He turned to Amina, his eyes filled with respect. This is Amina. She is not only my close friend but also one of the most successful people I have ever known. She is the owner of multiple businesses across the country. She has invested wisely in industries that continue to grow, and she has supported countless families through her work. In fact, she is far wealthier than anyone else present here tonight. The hall fell silent. For a moment, the air itself seemed to freeze. The same people who had laughed at her minutes ago now stared at her with wide eyes. Their jaws dropped slightly, their glasses hung in mid-air, and their smiles disappeared. Whispers filled the room quickly, but this time they carried shock instead of mockery. What? Did he say she owns businesses? One man muttered to his friend. Another whispered, we laughed at her, and she's richer than all of us combined. The women who had mocked her clothes earlier felt their faces turn red. The men who had teased her about her car and handbag looked down, unable to meet her calm gaze. It was as if the entire room had turned upside down in one moment. Amina stood quietly, her expression unchanged. She did not smile in pride, nor did she look at anyone with anger. She simply remained graceful, as though the revelation meant nothing to her. The host went on, her wealth is not only in money. She has built schools, supported charities, and provided opportunities for countless people. She has lived simply not because she cannot afford more, but because she values peace over show. And that, my friends, is something we should all admire. The silence in the room grew heavier. Guests shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes, remembering every laugh, every whisper, every unkind word they had spoken about her. Finally, one man broke the silence, trying to recover. He walked up to her with a forced smile. Madam Amina, I had no idea. Truly, it is an honor to meet you. His voice shook slightly, betraying his discomfort. Others quickly followed, surrounding her with compliments they had never thought to give before. It's wonderful to have you here, one woman said sweetly, though her words sounded artificial. We must spend time together soon, another added, hoping to erase the memory of her earlier laughter. But Amina's response was the same as it had always been, calm, polite, and gentle. She did not remind them of their mockery. She did not throw their arrogance back at them. She simply thanked them with a soft smile, speaking with the same grace she had shown from the beginning. Deep inside, many of the guests felt ashamed. They had measured her worth by her handbag, her dress, and her shoes. They had judged her for her simplicity, never realizing that she had the kind of success they could only dream of. That night, their pride had been broken not by force, but by truth. The rest of the evening felt different. The laughter was quieter, the boasting reduced. People glanced at Amina often, but now with respect, even fear. No one dared whisper about her again. When the event ended and guests left, Amina walked out the same way she had walked in, quietly, gracefully, without any show of pride. She had no need to prove herself, no need to punish those who mocked her. The truth had spoken louder than any words she could have said. As she stepped into the cool night air, she felt at peace. She knew that the people inside would never forget this evening. And she knew that the lesson they had learned would stay with them for a long time, that true worth is never worn on the outside, but carried within. When Amina left that evening, she carried herself the same way she had entered, quiet, graceful, and calm. Yet behind her silence, something had shifted. The truth had been revealed. The masks of pride worn by the so-called elite had fallen in front of their own eyes. The same people who had mocked her now looked at her with respect, and in their hearts, with regret. But for Amina, nothing changed within. She did not feel the need to celebrate their shock or to remind them of how they had treated her before. She believed that dignity lay in silence, and wisdom lay in forgiveness. She returned to her home, made herself a simple cup of tea, and sat by her window as she always did. The city lights sparkled outside, and she thought to herself, people measure worth in strange ways. But one day, they always learn the truth. In the days that followed, the story of that evening spread quickly among the circles of the elite. Guests who had once whispered insults now whispered about her wealth, her businesses, and her surprising simplicity. Some were embarrassed to admit how they had treated her, while others tried to change their behavior overnight, as if pretending they had respected her all along. One morning, Amina received a phone call from a woman who had mocked her shoes at the party. The woman's tone was sweet and careful now. "Amina, dear, I would love for you to join me for lunch one day. It would be such an honor to spend time with you." Amina smiled gently and replied, "Thank you. Perhaps another time." She did not feel bitterness, but she also did not feel the need to accept invitations that came only after the truth had been revealed. Another man who had once joked about her driving the bus sent her flowers with a note that read, "Forgive my words. I did not know who you were." Amina placed the flowers in a vase but shook her head softly. She thought, why should respect depend on who a person is? Shouldn't kindness be given freely, without knowing what someone owns? Her life continued as before. She still wore simple dresses, still carried her old handbag, and still drove the same car. She did not change her way of living just because people now looked at her differently. For her, truth was not about proving anything. It was about living in peace with herself. But the elite had changed. At every gathering after that, their eyes no longer carried arrogance when they looked at her. Instead, they watched her closely, afraid of repeating their mistake. Some tried too hard to impress her, speaking politely, offering her their chairs, asking for her opinion. Others stayed quiet around her, embarrassed by their past behavior. Amina remained the same. She listened politely, spoke gently, and never reminded anyone of their past actions. She did not need revenge, because she believed life itself had already balanced the scales. One evening, while speaking to her host friend, she shared her thoughts. "I never wanted them to know about my wealth. My peace was in being unseen. But perhaps it was meant to be revealed, not for me, but for them. Sometimes people need to be reminded that appearances can deceive." Her friend nodded and said, "You taught them a lesson they will never forget. You showed them that true dignity is not in wealth, but in humility. And you did it without a single harsh word." Indeed, her silence had been more powerful than any argument could ever be. Over time, many in that elite circle began to reflect on themselves. A few even admitted quietly that her presence had changed the way they thought. One woman told a friend, "I used to believe money meant showing off. But after meeting her, I realize money means nothing if you don't carry grace." Another man admitted, "We laughed at her shoes, yet her steps are stronger than ours. We wear pride, but she wears peace." Though most would never openly confess their shame, in their hearts, they carried the weight of their mistake. And that was enough. As for Amina, she continued her work quietly. She expanded her businesses, supported charities, and funded schools for children who had no access to education. She never advertised her generosity. She simply gave, because she believed that giving was the truest form of wealth. Those who knew her closely admired her deeply, but they also understood why she chose to stay out of the spotlight. Years passed, and the story of the simple woman who was richer than the elite became something of a quiet legend in the city. People whispered about her not with mockery, but with admiration. She became a reminder that humility and dignity were greater than jewels and dresses. Whenever she walked into a gathering after that, the room would grow quiet for a moment. Not because she demanded attention, but because her presence carried respect. She had not asked for it, yet it followed her everywhere. Still, she never changed her ways. She lived in the same modest house, walked the same simple streets, and kept her life peaceful. She often thought, wealth is like a shadow. It follows us, but it should never lead us. And so, the lesson remained. For those who had mocked her, the memory of their words haunted them each time they saw her calm smile. For those who admired her, her example became a guide for their own lives. And for Amina herself, nothing had changed. She was still the same woman who woke up early, made her own tea, watered her plants, and watched the world quietly with gentle eyes. Her story was proof that true greatness never needs to shout. It simply exists, quietly, steadily, and powerfully. The world often judges by appearances, but Amina's life was a reminder that appearances are only the surface. Beneath simple clothes may live a fortune, and behind a calm smile may rest a strength greater than pride. She remained the woman who chose humility over arrogance, peace over show, and kindness over pride. And in doing so, she became not only richer in wealth but richer in spirit, something no mocking word could ever take away.